Let's also get you a perspective from Ajit Dayal. This is on markets now. Of course, he spoke on a whole variety of things, including, of course, how things are likely to pan out from here, awaiting government stimulus and lots more, isn't it?
If you look at globalization per se, there's been a lot of discussion and argument, should globalization be rolled back and all? Well, the pandemic is automatically rolling back globalization because there's little movement of people and certainly little movement of goods. But I think there's a fundamental issue that's been raised up because of globalization's past history and past achievements. I think many countries have now realized that relying upon a faraway country, whether it's China or Vietnam or India, for supplies of everything is a bit ridiculous because we've seen the shutdown. I'd like to rewind a bit more in history. In 2002, 2003, we had SARS hit the world. Now, in 2002, 2003, there were no smartphones, there was no WhatsApp, there was no WeChat. So the social media sort of spread about the news of the disease was far lower. But I remember I just got off a train from southern China to Hong Kong in the month of February 2003 when SARS was declared a pandemic by the WHO. And then I rushed from Hong Kong and I went back to Bombay because my father was a doctor when he was alive and I knew he'd look after me, etc. But I remember in May, June of 2003, they were actually considering shutting down the ports on the western side of the US where a lot of goods were coming in from China. Now that was 2003. Between 2003 and 2018, 19, 20, the world has become even more integrated. In addition to the Chinese tourists, the Chinese goods, the goods from Asia, all over the world, it's just been a massive increase in globalization. And I think the fact that countries are not making their own masks, their own personal private equipment, sort of their own protection equipment, that's been a huge, huge issue. And I think that's bringing to the fore that should this globalization model change? Should there be something that we definitely manufacture in our home countries or not? So I think that's a major shift that many policymakers will address over a while. But to get back to your question about what central banks are doing, so the recovery after 2008-9, after the global financial crisis, was led primarily by central banks, printing money, trying to get the economic, sort of the fund settlement system moving, to unfreeze the bond markets, to give money where it was due or not even due when they rescued large firms like Goldman Sachs, et cetera, et cetera. But it was money led. This one has to be government spending led. And Australia and the US to some extent have shown the way. Australia announced within a few days of their planning the lockdown, their prime minister went on TV and he said, I'm going to guarantee everyone's salary to the tune of 80%. And they've taken a 15% to GDP sort of effort to get the economy, to stay alive and certainly not to collapse. In the Indian environment, it's shameful that after 48 days of lockdown or whatever we've been, if you count the curfew and the state bunds that we had, for example, in Maharashtra. So after 46, 48 days, we've still not been able to address the issue. The government has given a pitiful 0.8% of GDP as a boost. Even if you count the fact that they're about to borrow some more money and increase their limits, I mean, that's another 2% or so in terms of delta of total GDP. And that's not enough. You need to have, in my view, between 2 to 4% of GDP stimulus or support just for the poor people. And then you have to talk about companies and small companies and big companies and everyone else. There's got to be 8, 9, 10, 11, 12% of GDP stimulus. I don't know what these people are doing. I don't know why they're not coming out with a massive program to get things moving, even though we're all sitting in lockdown. Right. There is certain thing that needs to get helped and the government has to help us and they're not doing it.
Right. In fact, let's take that point forward. But before that, the response to this has to be twofold. One on the medical and health side and the other on the economic side. And you are sitting out there in Zurich observing how various health authorities across the world are addressing this massive pandemic in their own way. How are you analyzing the response, both first on the medical and health side, and then on the economic side, also taking into account that certain measures so far has been taken by Indian authorities as well, while maintaining that their response will be in a phased manner and not outright?
Right. So again, some sort of macro data on this, right? So from 2009, after Lehman, when we start to recover, we have green shoots in the world and the world is moving up in GDP. Between 2009 and 2019, the world has spent collectively, if you look at companies and different corporations effectively, the world has spent more on building Starbucks and on building McDonald's restaurants than they've spent on building hospital beds. Why are we in a lockdown? We're in a lockdown not because this is a dangerous virus. Please understand that. This is not a dangerous virus. I have asthma, so I'm at danger. That's a separate issue. I'm a subset of the population. But for most people, they won't even know that they got the virus. The only reason that we are in lockdown is because there are not enough hospital beds in the world, that if we all get hit, because this virus spreads very rapidly, so chances are we'll all fall ill quite quickly. Though most of us will survive, 99% of us will survive. But the 1% that includes me, people like me who've got asthma, we are high risk. But if we all fall ill, there's not enough hospital beds to get to. And therefore, they said, let's flatten the curve. We want less people coming to the hospital. So when you land up in the hospital, I can treat you well, I can focus on you, and you have a good chance to survive. People like me, the 1% and the very old, etc. But so everyone is suffering because Ajit Dayal has to be saved. That's ridiculous. And the problem is, I did some sort of, I wrote an article on this, that if the world had spent $30 billion, and $30 billion in a $66 trillion global economy is nothing, 0.05%, whatever. If the world had spent $30 billion on hospital beds across all the countries, we would not be in lockdown. And now we have lost a few $trillion, anywhere up to $12 trillion in output, because we did not spend $30 billion. It's like saying, I have a lot of risk of fire and theft in my house, but I don't buy the insurance. That's what we did. We didn't buy insurance. So please recognize that. Now, given the fact that I had asthma, I was actually in London and I was there on a marketing trip. And I saw that people in London were very, very casual about this. This was March 6th. So March 6th, I'm in London and people are very casual. I'm nervous and the rates are rising in London. So I said, this is a failure. I'm going to Switzerland where I have a son who goes to school here. So I said, come to Zurich. Well, I came to Zurich and this was as bad. Now, Zurich just sits on the top of northern Italy. In 5 hours, you can take a train from Milan to Zurich. So Milan is the epicenter and Zurich's got open borders. So suddenly you can have, the entire virus spread to Zurich. So I left Zurich and I said, hey, India's the place to be because the virus there is still very small. And we had just started to screen at the airport, like it was just 2-3 days before I landed. So I got to India on March 8th night. I quarantined myself for 2 weeks because I knew I had been, to Europe before that. Quarantined myself at home. And just as I emerged on the 22nd of March, we had the curfew. 23rd March was Maharashtra Bandh. 24th March was a lockdown.
Right.
And anyway, so I was actually in India. But to get to the health situation, so even look at the BMC. In the month of March, the BMC announced its annual budget. So now 150 countries have already been infected by COVID. 150. So this not like it's not in a few countries. It's a pandemic. Right. Everyone's been infected. What does the Bombay Municipal Corporation do? And this is shameful. They announce a 2 crore allocation for COVID. Please look at the headlines. 2 crore allocation to COVID. They announce a 500 to 700 crore allocation to building a coastal road. Now look at the mindset of the BMC. Are they out there trying to save the city of Bombay? Or are they out there trying to build a completely irrelevant coastal road, which God knows who's going to be driving it when we emerge from COVID? And that coastal road itself is under massive issues because potentially it could flood the city of Bombay. They're building a road that's going to be 6 meters high along the coast, like building a wall. If you have a teacup, if you have a saucer, You pour water.
Right.
What happens to the water? It stays in the center. So they're building a wall. So the response, particularly in India, which anyway has a very broken healthcare system as the virus spreads and the need to look after people,
Right.
we have a broken healthcare system. On top of that, in high density cities, Bombay is like a New York, and New York has accounted for a third of all USA deaths. One third
Right.
of deaths in all of America have come from the Democrat ruled state of New York. And Bombay could mirror that. Rather than planning for that, our healthcare system is broken. We have bureaucrats who are more worried about the coastal road than they're
Right.
about trying to look after health. And now they're scrambling. So, it's really been a sad situation in that sense. No planning.